Reports. We're joined by Pence's former Chief of Staff, Marc Short. Marc, good to have you on the show. I want to ask you, first of all, about the big news out of D.C. today that Utah Senator Mitt Romney announced he's resigning. He's doing what polls show that most voters want both Biden and Trump to do, step aside for a new generation of leaders. What's your reaction to his announcement today?
Well, I think he's had a long career inside our party, and I think he's served the people of Utah well. I think it's hard to follow in the footsteps of Orrin Hatch, and I think that I do think that the party has moved in a different direction, and it'll be interesting to see what Utah wants to nominate for the next senator from their state.
It's striking. Romney is 76. He's basically still at the top of his game. He's voluntarily stepping down as calls continue for Senator Feinstein, who's 90, to resign, and questions continue about Leader McConnell, who's 81 and clearly dealing with some serious health issues. Do you think that Romney's announcement will put pressure on them?
I don't think so. I think that Mitch McConnell's been pretty clear that he plans to fill out this term, which, is roughly another 18 months. I think that for Dianne Feinstein, I think there's a difference. I know they get lumped in together, but I think her situation with dementia is far more advanced. But either way, I don't anticipate that Romney's announcement will have an impact on what they decide to do.
Interesting. OK, we'll get to the town hall in a second, but I also want to get your reaction to Speaker McCarthy's announcement that he's opening this impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Even some conservative members of Congress, of the Freedom Caucus, like Representative Ken Buck, say there's no evidence the president committed any crime and fear this could backfire. Do you agree?
Well, I think that Ken Buck has been on the right side on a lot of these issues lately. But I think that in this case, it's appropriate for a separate branch of government to have investigative powers and for them to investigate this until the end. And I think there are a lot of concerns about the income that Hunter Biden received from Ukraine and from China when he had no expertise in those areas. It was clearly a relationship because of his father being vice president of the United States. Having said that, I do think that we as a country have become far more accustomed to impeachments, and I don't think that's healthy. And I think that Nancy Pelosi created a terrible precedent when she decided to move forward with an inquiry before having a full floor vote in the House. And I think that Kevin has repeated that misstep, and that I believe that when you do something as serious as impeaching or opening an impeachment inquiry into the President of the United States, it should have the full support of the House moving forward. From a process perspective, I just think that that's a healthier way to go for our country.
But shouldn't it also be opened if shouldn't there also be evidence of wrongdoing? Right now, there's a lot of evidence that Hunter Biden acted in an unsavory, maybe even sleazy way by cashing in on his famous family name. But he's not illegal, and he's not the only one by a long shot in Washington, D.C. to do that.
I think that that's certainly the last point is certainly true, Elizabeth. But I think that it's fair for them to continue the investigation to see where it goes. And I certainly am supportive of them allowing an inquiry to go. But I feel like that should continue at a committee level until there reaches a point that you're enabled to have a full House vote to say there's a majority of members of the House who want to support an inquiry into impeachment of the President of the United States.
Do you really think that the caucus, the MAGA caucus, as it's called, or the Freedom Caucus, is going to allow an impeachment inquiry to just then they'll inquire, and if they find nothing, they'll say, OK, never mind, we'll stop?
Well, I don't think that that's the concern, candidly, Elizabeth. I think that there's plenty of Republicans who at this point would not have supported the inquiry, which is why it was not presented for a full House floor vote. I certainly think that there's going to be a handful of Republicans who would look to impeach it on any standard. And, candidly, I don't think there's the same media questioning when the Democrats decided to impeach Donald Trump the first go round or the second go round regarding due process in the way that this has been happening in the past, or any question that there were certainly liberal members of the Democrat caucus that would have impeached Donald Trump for anything, regardless of what the evidence said, even if we ended up showing that much of the evidence in the Russia hoax investigation was fraudulently presented by the FBI. So I certainly think that the left has gone too far in that, and I worry that right now we're following their precedent.
Yeah, two wrongs don't make a right, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Right? OK.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for simplifying my answer.
Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.